For 40 years, three letters reigned supreme over worship in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Those three letters were TLH, which stand for the Lutheran Hymnal. For 40 years, that was the official hymnal of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And although there was a companion volume that tried to introduce some new material, shall we say, and we'll discuss that more a little bit later, but despite that, the hymnal was the Lutheran hymnal. Generations grew up on it. It really cast a long shadow over what we do even to this day. And there are those congregations that still make use of it even now. But why? Well, let's look in a little bit more detail at the history of the Lutheran hymnal, how it came to be, and what came after it, and what impact it still has today on worship in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And after we look at all of that, let's look at the state of TLH today in 2024. Okay, so our story, well, we could begin at any number of places. I mean, some of the hymns in the Lutheran hymnal are quite ancient, but we're going to begin with the beginning of the book itself, all of the various texts of hymns and tunes and everything, and of course the liturgical material being compiled into the book that was TLH. Now, this wasn't the first time that the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod had used an English language hymnal. That actually started shortly after the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod started using the English language in worship at all in 1912. And they had a hymnal called Evangelical Lutheran Hymn Book. Now, that hymnal was not entirely original. It was based on a different hymnal also called Evangelical Lutheran Hymn Book that had been produced by the denomination that became the English district of the LCMS later on. And this hymnal, well, it served for a while, but by the beginning of the 1940s, there was some concern that it wasn't really meeting the needs of the time. For instance, some of our hymns traditionally used the same tune as the German national anthem, and you can imagine that by the year of our Lord, 1941, people in the United States didn't necessarily feel so good about singing a tune that went with Deutschland, Deutschland über alles in church. Ooh. So the time had come to make some updates and modernizations in various ways. So the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod got together with its best friends, including the Wisconsin Evangelical Lutheran Church, the Wisconsin Synod, and the Evangelical Lutheran Synod, and we came up with a new hymnal together, the Lutheran Hymnal. We did a lot of things together back in those days, in fact. So, this new hymnal had a lot of neat stuff in it. You know, it had all the psalms, and it had various hymns. Some of them hadn't been written back in the 1910s when Evangelical Lutheran Hymn Book had come out. So, it was just the neat new hymnal. And it was pretty solid. So, okay, so it did have its flaws, but it was a pretty solid hymnal. And it was well loved because it was our hymnal. And congregations loved it. They bought it. Other hymnals had been used previously in English, but there was really good uptake by congregations of the Lutheran hymnal. Something about it just spoke to people. So it became pretty universal in LCMS churches. But of course, the years passed, and well, you know, it had been several decades. So by 1965, the feeling was that maybe it was time to start updating things again. Now, we can't really talk about the hymnal of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod without saying a little bit about the history of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod itself. At the start of our story, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod was pretty darn conservative in the 1910s. In the 1920s, a shift had started to some more modernist kind of theology. Things were starting to change. Some doubts about the truth of the Bible had started creeping into theological circles in the LCMS, and some thought that maybe we should explore more critical ways of reading the Bible. And in the 60s, that was certainly in full swing. It had really, really taken root, especially at the seminary in St. Louis. And the stuff that the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod was working on in the 1960s and early 1970s, well, it reflects that that sort of spirit of the times, shall we say. So in 1969, when some of the new material was being published as the worship supplement, well, it wasn't quite the same theology that the Lutheran Hymnal had promoted. It wasn't really the same theology that we had clung to for the history of the Synod until that point. One example would be that some new ideas for worship services were introduced in the worship supplement. But, for instance, they changed the Lord's Prayer in certain ways. They had a creed that wasn't the Nicene Creed. It wasn't the Apostles' Creed. It wasn't even the Athanasian Creed. It was kind of this new made-up thing that, in certain subtle ways, sort of suggested that some of the ancient truths of the Bible maybe weren't so true. It was not good. And congregations were a little bit more skeptical of the worship supplement than they had been of the Lutheran Hymnal. And it was a sign of things to come, because throughout the 70s, work was continuing on this new hymnal, the Lutheran Book of Worship. And before it came out, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod had had a big shakeup, the Seminex event in the 70s, 1974, I believe, where there was a big walkout at the seminary in St. Louis. All the people, the students and faculty who wanted to change the theology of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod got sick of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod not wanting to change, and they left. And they took a bunch of congregations with them and formed one of the predecessor bodies of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And so that hymnal, that Lutheran Book of Worship, even though the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod had called for it to be produced and had worked on it, we decided that the stuff, even some of the stuff that the LCMS contributed to it, really wasn't great, and we could not sign off on it because it just wasn't the historic theology that we stood for. Now, in both the worship supplement and Lutheran Book of Worship, there were some good things. There were some new hymns like Thy Strong Word that are, I think, absolute standards of worship in Lutheran Church Missouri Synod congregations to this day. You know, it's not that this stuff was all bad, but there was enough of it that we just really couldn't sign off on it. So, the Lutheran Hymnal remained the hymnal of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Now, we did have the problem, though, that the TLH was really starting to show its age. A lot of other denominations were using 3-year lectionaries. In other words, instead of 1 year of a cycle of different Bible readings that repeats every year, they were using these cycles of Bible readings that went through more of the Bible over a 3-year repeating time span. And that simply exposed members of those churches to more of the Bible in church. You know, the original TLH didn't even really have a provision for Old Testament readings on a Sunday morning. So it really was time for a new hymnal. Lots of new hymns had been written. Like I said, Thy Strong Word, and This is the Feast, and a lot of other good things that we wanted to make available to our congregations. And we wanted to do it in a doctrinally pure way so that people wouldn't also encounter weird creeds and changed Lord's prayers and things like that might cast doubt on their faith. So we rushed over 4 years to produce a new hymnal based on LBW, but better. And, well, we produced a new hymnal. It sure was a hymnal. It was called Lutheran Worship. Now, by this time, most copies of TLH were red. Most copies of LBW had been a green color, and most copies of this new Lutheran Worship, LW, were blue. So, as the new blue hymnal is coming out, a lot of congregations, well, they picked up on the fact that it was rushed. And there were still some things in there that were modernized that really didn't need modernizing, and it just felt weird, and it wasn't as good of a hymnal. I mean, it was rushed out in 4 years to be a replacement for something that really wasn't working, and it all showed. It all showed. Some of the tunes for hymns were kind of weird and awkward, and a lot of the harmonies were hard to sing and not necessarily as nice. So LW, again, it introduced some nice new things. It gave people some new options for worship and stuff. There is a lot of good to be said about it, but also it didn't really work for everyone. So about a third of the LCMS never touched LW, never went over. These were, at that time, the old red hymnal congregations, and they weren't going to be blue hymnal congregations because, well, the blue hymnal simply had problems. So, okay, that's not great. So, in the intervening years, between Lutheran Worship in 1982 and the next hymnal to come out, everybody knew that they needed to do a better job. They needed to take their time. They needed to be more careful. They just needed to make a better hymnal. And so they got together and worked hard. And finally, in 2006, they came out with the Lutheran Service Book. And of course, just like with LBW and LW, there was Worship Supplement 98 that came out, would you guess, in 1998? that sort of gave some new and different ideas to build on what was in LW and to sort of help bring things forward a little bit, and also to try some things out that would be in LSB, Lutheran Service Book. So in 2006 they came out with Lutheran Service Book. Again, it's not perfect. It doesn't have all the Psalms. There's something like 44 Psalms that are missing from LSB. There are some things about it that I don't think work as well. And it does legitimately have a whole lot of good features. I think on the whole, it fixes just about everything that was wrong with LW. And I mean, it's a good hymnal. I think we finally have, and this is my opinion, and I know some of you aren't going to like this, but personally, I think LSB is a worthy successor at last to TLH. But, opinions differ. There are still congregations that want to use TLH. In fact, We still use TLH sometimes at Emmanuel Lutheran Church in Dearborn Heights, Michigan. I guess that brings us to, where is TLH today? So none of these hymnals that I've talked about were really intended to be used alone. What do I mean by that? Am I talking about those worship supplements and stuff again? Not exactly. So what I mean is, these hymnals are what the congregations are holding in the pew, what people might use for devotional time at home. But it's not the only thing that a pastor needs in order to conduct worship services and funerals and things like that. There are a couple of other books that go with the hymnal. One is the altar book. Otherwise, it could be called, the altar book that went with TLH was called the Lutheran Liturgy. And you might call this a missal, M-I-S-S-A-L, not M-I-S-S-I-L-E. It's not something that fires and carries a warhead and an explosive or anything like that. It's a missal. It's a book that contains the Mass, okay? Which, of course, Mass is a historical term for worship service. It's not just a Catholic word. All right, so these altar books or missals, they went along with all of these hymnals. You know, there's the LSB altar book now. There's Lutheran Liturgy. That is one thing, and it can make it easier to work out of the altar book when you're a pastor presiding over a church service. For one thing, sometimes things are printed bigger, so you can leave the altar book on the altar and have your hands free to do things like make the sign of the cross over the elements of communion and still see what you're doing. So the altar book is important if you're going to use a hymnal. And there's also the agenda. You know, the Lutheran hymnal had the Lutheran agenda that went with it. And I always think that sounds like an ominous book, like we're up to something. We're Lutherans and we have an agenda. But really, agenda is just Latin for things to be done. And so the Lutheran agenda is a book of things, you know, church services, funeral services, baptisms, weddings, committal services for when you're at the graveside and you're burying someone, anniversaries of congregations, ordaining a pastor, all of that kind of stuff and more is what goes in the agenda. Lutheran worship had an agenda that went with it. Also, they introduced the little agenda, which was a little book that pastors could carry around, like if you're doing a wedding or you're doing the graveside committal. You don't have to have this great big book with you. LSB has something similar. There's the agenda, that's the big book for using in church, but there's also the pastoral care companion that has, funeral services, committals. So it has a lot of useful information for pastors to use that way. Now, all of that is to say that when LSB came out, Concordia Publishing House, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod's publishing wing, as they call themselves, they quit producing the agenda and altar book for Lutheran worship and the Lutheran hymnal. So it's all well and good if you want to continue using one of these hymnals, but it would be awfully hard to switch over to it. And if you want to replace your agenda or your altar book or missal or whatever, good luck finding a replacement. You still can buy LW and TLH. It's just that they're not fully supported like they used to be. So you'll notice I said you can still buy TLH. And I wondered, are they still printing it? Or is this like new old stock or something? What's going on with TLH? So we get to the second half of this video. Okay, let's do the unboxing here. I don't think this is going to go as gracefully as some of those professional unboxing channels. Yeah. See if I can do this without, hurting myself. Ooh. All right. Now let's get the other side here. Building up all that tension. Oh, yes. Oop. try to... This is why I don't do unboxing videos. That, and I never had a reason to before. Okay, so the box is open. See if I can do a dramatic opening without the hymnal falling right out. Ooh. Try to cover this stuff up so you don't get any of my personal information. Oh, and here we go! Right there, next to the other book I also bought. This is an interesting book, by the way. Bought it on sale for like $3, so if you can find a good deal on it, go for it. Or, I mean, even pay full price. But anyway, here it is. Here is the Lutheran Hymnal, the 1941, TLH, the Lutheran Hymnal, new in shrink wrap from CPH. So I'm going to get it out of the box and we will see what it's like. Okay, now we have TLH out of the box. Let's pop this guy open here. Shrink wrap. Okay. That's why we have tools. This is what separates us from certain other primates and whatnot. Although I guess there are animals that use tools, but like, you know, like a stick. Maybe a stick that they've sharpened, not steel that they had to dig up iron-bearing rocks and forge it and whatever. I don't know. Okay, so now we have the shrink wrap open. Oh, here it is. This is... this is pretty weird, to be honest. This is brand new, but it's just like old copies of TLH. It smells kind of like plastic, honestly, instead of having an old book smell. It has this is the first difference I'm seeing so far. Let's see if we can get it to focus. It has the new CPH logo and the website. So this is not like new old stock. This is actually a new printing of TLH. It's incredible. You can see they have the well, it's not gilding, but the red color on the edges of the pages. That's all like crinkly crackly as each page separates. I don't know, can you hear? Do some ASMR. I'm not using this microphone right now, by the way, as you can tell, because there's no wire running to it. It would pick up a lot of sounds of the furnace and the dishwasher at the moment. But anyway, because I'm right under the kitchen here. And the furnace is right behind me, by the way, behind this brick wall. Just, I don't know what to tell you. They're still making TLH. Just like it was back in 1941. We got the Magnificat printed there. This is for Vespers. Let's see. Let's go to page 5. Let's go to page 5, the classic. There it is. Page 5. The order of morning service without communion. Let's check page 15, which is the order of Holy Communion. Here it is, page 15, the legendary classic common service of 1883 as revised by the General Council of Lutherans in North America. This is... It's TLH, but brand new. It's still supported. We're still making this. I don't know... this is a video I'll go ahead and say, because I can edit this out if it's not true. But I don't think Concordia Publishing House is still producing the Lutheran Agenda and the Lutheran Liturgy. I think it's just TLH and the accompaniment stuff for it. So the rest of that you have to get used books, but for this, it's brand new. I have other copies of this that are older. They have ripped pages. They have crayons from some kid in a previous generation, probably, bored in church, just scribbling in the hymnal. One has somebody's name on it. Yeah, it's easy to get old books for this system, but TLH itself, you can get old free copies of it, or you can get a brand new copy. Maybe that was a big expenditure of money that I didn't really need, but it makes for an interesting video. So I hope you enjoyed this look at Lutheran history and heritage in North America, the history of TLH and LCMS hymnals and stuff like that. Have any questions, leave them in the comments. Send me a message, however you want to do it. If you're ever in the Detroit area looking for a church, Hosanna Tabor is located right in Redford, and Emmanuel is on Ann Arbor Trail in Dearborn Heights. We would be glad to see you. Look us up. See you later.